Thank you.
All right. So the room has just opened and I do see a few attendees coming in. So thank you all for hanging out in our waiting room or Zoom's waiting room. I'm not going to claim the waiting room for our own because I have no idea what happens in those. So hopefully it was fun. I don't know what you did, but thanks for hanging out while you were there. So we did not start the session just yet. We are getting all the panelists all ready to go, all settled in their chairs or standing desks. I don't see anybody standing. I was using a standing desk earlier today. My legs got tired. I'm now seated at my wife's desk. It's just how it works sometimes. Like you need that break. I'm in the Eastern time zone, so it's a little later in my day. My kids were home. One of them had strep throat. It's just like, it's that time of the year, like you need to sit down once in a while. So that's what I'm doing. And again, as we have attendees coming in, we did not start yet. You did not miss anything. And speaking of missing things, we will record this session. So if you want to just kind of experience the session, hang out with us for the hour, listen in, ask your questions and all that great stuff without trying to take notes, feel free to do that. And we will email you the video and you can write down anything you need at the end when you go back and watch it some other time or 50 more times, or when you share it with all your friends and colleagues. Tonight's session is all about meeting some current MBA students, some recent alumni, some further out alumni. And we're just going to talk about the MBA experience from many different perspectives, whether that is, again, where they are in their program experience, where they are, where they went to school, where they're from originally. So lots of different perspectives that we're going to share today. We have some pre-prepared questions based off of what you all pre-submitted to us. So we're going to try and get to as many of those questions as possible. And with that, first, what I'd like to do is just kind of go around the room really quick, have everyone give us a quick introduction of your name, where you went to school or where you are currently going to school, and whether or not that is your case, right? What year you're in your MBA program, or the fact that you may be an alum as well. So with that, we'll start. I'm just going to go around what I'm seeing is kind of a circle here. So Alexander, if you want to get us started, we'll go from there.
Sure. My name's Alexander. I just graduated from Wharton The Lauder on May 14th, so a little over a month ago. And it feels like a lot longer. So much has happened since then, but it was a wonderful, wonderful journey. But it wasn't too long ago I was in your shoes thinking about applying and considering where to go, or maybe just about to start. So really excited to be on the panel today.
Awesome. And thanks for being here. Minnie, I have you next on my little circle here. So let's meet you.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Minnie. I'm currently at MIT Sloan. I've just finished my first year, so we'll be graduating 2024. I'm also very happy to be here and excited to see what questions you have.
Awesome. Thank you for being here also. Taylor, let's hear from you next.
How's it going? I'm Taylor. I just finished up my first year at Columbia Business School here in New York City. I know it's a stressful application process, so happy to answer any questions you might have.
Awesome. Thank you. And we will have plenty of application fun questions coming up next. Next, Zoo.
Hi, everyone. Shu here. I should know Zoom by now because I spent my first year using it, but I was spending 5 minutes trying to figure out how to use it again. Anyway, so I'm a T22, so I graduated from Tech last year. I cannot believe it has been a year now, and it has been such a great 2 years of my life. So cannot wait to share my journey there.
Awesome. Thank you. And thanks for joining. And you figured out the Zoom. I can see you, I can hear you. This is great. You did a great job. Justin, how about from you?
Hey, everyone. Justin from Blanchette, born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, graduated from University of Michigan last May, and I'm currently over at McKinsey.
Very nice. Thank you for joining us. Anushka, how about for you?
Hi, I'm Anushka. I go to NYU Stern, just finished up my first year and doing an internship in consulting. So happy to chat all things NYU and all things consulting.
Awesome. Thank you for being here as well. And Destinée, I didn't mean to save you for the last year. I saw you kind of come off mute. I may have skipped around. I'm sorry about that.
Oh,
let's hear it from you as well.
No problem at all. I just was like clicking things. Hi, everyone. Destinée Mentor Richards, also from Brooklyn, New York. I went to Tuck and graduated last week. So I am a Tuck class of 2023 and newly minted alum. Definitely remember being in your shoes, whether you're applying or just got accepted. And so really excited to be here. And I'll be headed into consulting at Bain in DC.
Very nice. Okay, so a few consultants, a few folks from similar schools, similar regions. I'm not going to play that game of do you know each other because you're from Brooklyn. There's like 4 million people in Brooklyn. Am I short of that? Maybe 5 million at this point. I grew up on Long Island, so I'm not going to say that geographically Brooklyn's part of my hometown, but we won't fight that fight tonight. So awesome. Thank you all for being here. I realized I didn't say who I am, so I'm Mike, and I'm with ClearAdmit. ClearAdmit, for those of you who have not used our site because you're not already going into an MBA program, we are a fantastic resource site for MBA applicants. Learn more about how to get into your dream program, everything from application tips to interview guides to decision trackers. Our Livewire tool is extremely popular. So check us out. That's all I'm going to say about us. You'll get more information about us after this session. So what I want to jump into is kind of at the beginning, right? So for some of you who are first years, you just went through this process probably about a year ago on getting into your program. For the others who have just graduated, right? This is now a couple of years back. So you got to kind of put on your thinking cap, and the world was different a few years back too. So your experience may be a little different from what you'll hear from the first years, without saying that dirty acronym that we all experienced a few years back. We know what we're talking about. So what we're going to do here is just let us know, when you were thinking about going to school for an MBA, how did you go about figuring out what programs you're going to apply to? How'd you really make your short list? And let's see, so I'm just going to kind of out of a hat, I'm going to start with Justin on this one.
Oh man, you put me on the spot. I would say number one. So I was gracious enough to have my older sister who went to business school. She went to George Washington, so she kind of laid the blueprint for me. But I think for me, I kind of came up with a list of like maybe 10 or so schools, and then from there wanted to make sure that I had a chance to see them when they came to my city, just to kind of get a sense of like who they were, what they were about, what their mission was outside of like what I could see on the website. And then from there, build out a criteria based on like the things that I was looking to do post business school, and then visited that short list of schools again to kind of see like what the students were like, and did I see myself? Did it resonate with me being on the campus? Could I be myself? And then that was pretty much it in regards to criteria.
Very nice. Does someone else want to add to that, or second that, or say something different about their experience?
Yeah, I can say something else. Yeah. So I had a couple things. First, I really wanted a program that was really global. So I just would ask at every info session, what sorts of global programs do you have? Do students study abroad? Is there opportunity for language and cultural learning? And Wharton was one of the few that actually had a dual degree program in international studies called Lauder that allowed me to pursue that. And then the other thing I wanted to say was take advantage of like diversity conferences that happen every year. I actually first heard about the Lauder program in Wharton through Reaching Out MBA, which is a LGBTQIA diversity conference that happens every year in different cities around the country. I had other friends at school take advantage of MLT in their program. And so really just take advantage of every opportunity there are to learn about the things that you care about, whether it be, global interests, diversity interests, or, particular areas of industry interest as well. So there are many, many ways to find out about schools.
Nice. Destinée, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to hop in really quickly. I'm a firm believer success leaves clues. And so I spend a lot of time looking at leaders of organizations and people who I'd want to grow into in 10, 15 years and trying to figure out what were the common paths they took. I also talked to folks who were doing interesting things and saying, hey, if I got an MBA, like what in addition to an MBA would it take to get to where you are? At the time, even though I'm from Brooklyn, New York, I actually lived in St. Louis, Missouri, and applied in the middle of COVID. So it was much more difficult to get in touch with schools. And even if they were coming to my city, I wasn't in a target location. And so spent a lot of time reaching out to alums. I was in MLT, whether it be through that, I reached out to folks from my undergrad. I cold emailed people, which for me was also a very helpful data point. Because the schools where I felt like I got more reception and more traction, and I could find more people with similar stories or similar ambitions, quickly rose to the top of my list and helped me get a really good sense of the culture.
That's awesome.
I just want to add to that, on the culture piece. So NYU Stern was actually the only school that I applied to. Probably the biggest risk I've ever taken in my life. And I'm really grateful and thankful to this day that it paid off. And I think kind of going off the culture piece, I think every school boosts and talks about culture. And for me, I'm from California, I'm from the Bay Area, and I knew New York was always the dream for me. And so that kind of brought it down to 2 schools. And the advice that I got early on was like, when you talk to students at that school or alumni of the school, could you imagine being friends with them? Could you imagine working for them one day or working alongside them? And that culture kind of resonated with me most at Stern, where I really felt like people at Stern embrace this I win, you win, we win together culture. And I'm happy to say that I really felt like I made the right choice, and I'm glad the school also picked me. So that's all.
That's great. I like that. The mutual selection of each other is important. That's great. Minnie, I saw you coming off mute as well. Did you have anything else you wanted to? Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I'll just quickly add. I think it touches on what everyone already mentioned. I think a very important thing that I did was just to really reflect on the purpose of, or digging into the reason why you think you want to do an MBA. And I think, as we all heard, everyone had kind of a different reason. And that will boil down to that will bring you to the criteria of choosing the school. I think for me, it was definitely primarily a career pivot, or actually a more specialization, if you may. I knew I wanted to do tech, and I knew I wanted to explore entrepreneurship, and I do want to be with the people that I can see myself, grow with for 2 years. And then all of those things just brought me to Sloan. And I have to say, yeah, all 3 things really were beyond my expectation. So I really think knowing your purpose of going to the MBA would really help.
Yeah, I mean, these are all great answers. I think in my mind, a common thread is this kind of personal connection to the school you ultimately chose, right? And some of that is different for some of you from your answers, but there seems to be that thread of like, there was a personal reason that you ended up choosing the school that you chose, which brings me to kind of like, I don't know if I'm going to call this like a lightning round, but maybe like a quick survey of all of you sitting here. So one thing that folks tend to do when they're putting their school list together, right, is they look at rankings, right? How many of you, you're all at great schools, obviously, right? So how many of you used rankings as your first or second decision point when you made your list? Did anybody? 1, a little bit, 2, maybe 3. Okay, so some did. Okay. So another question, and this just came in on our chat. So to what extent did your test score determine your choice of school? So this is like your profile, right? And if you're, I'll expand this question. So your profile, you knew what the schools are looking for on their class profiles, right? Did you self-select your school list to apply to based off of those numbers that you saw? Or did these personal connections kind of override that stuff? Like you shot for schools regardless of your scores, regardless if you thought you were a match on your metrics, but you liked the vibe of the school, I guess, is that kind of. So did anybody lean more on your profile to select your school? A little bit. 1. Okay, so that's great. Actually, I kind of like that. So most of you then kind of went off of like, I like this school, I'm applying to this school, and if they like me back, like I'm in a good spot. Yeah, cool. Those are actually both, those are my quick little 2 questions there, just to kind of, we got answers from 7 folks all at the same time. So that's awesome. Okay, so our next question, right, and this is just about the process of applying. Taylor, I'll give you some time to think as I'm asking the question. We'll start with you on this one. So what would you, when you think back of like preparing your application to business school, what was the one thing that really took you the longest to prepare, to get ready, to then put forth in your application?
Yeah, certainly. I think the essay is the key thing that a lot of people, tend to overlook, because I think by the time you're getting around to applying, most of the hard work's already done, right? You've already taken the test. You've been working really hard for a few years, performing well in your job, trying to, do interesting stuff. But, trying to tie that all together into a compelling story that makes someone want to root for you, someone on the admissions committee who's a human being and, wants you to do good things for the world and so on. That takes a long time. And I feel like it took quite a few edits to get it right. And a lot of help from other people and using them as a sounding board. Like, hey, does this sound all right? Or a bit pretentious, or, does it ring authentic? Knowing that.
Yeah, it's a great answer, and would make sense for the reasons that you said, right? I mean, it's a very personal touch a lot of times, and yeah, it makes sense. Anybody have a different portion of your application that took you longer, maybe, besides the essays? No, everyone's gonna go with essays, right? Yeah, it's tough.
I guess I could quickly jump in because I think Sloan's application is a little different. In my experience, I feel like we didn't have those very personal topics as your essay topic. You do have to write short cover letters and the video, but I would say GMAT probably took me a little bit longer, just looking back at the application process, but that's for Sloan. Otherwise, I do totally agree that for some of the other schools, those essays could take a very long time to get to a place that you're happy with.
That's good. And Minnie, you did a great transition because it came up in the chat. How long did you study for the GRE GMAT exam? So we can do this another like ask the audience kind of poll, right? So would anybody say days? Did you take it like within a couple of days? No, I like that. So you're laughing at me, but some people do. They go in cold. I don't know. I didn't do that, but some people do. Weeks. Like we're saying like weeks, like 2 to 5 weeks or so, right? Weeks. Months. Months. Okay, like 2 to 3 months or longer? 2 months, 4 months,
6.
6 months. Okay, still half a year. Okay. Anybody longer than that? Longer than 6 months? No. Okay, so we'll say it looks like the most of the group will say between like 2 to 6 months. That sounds about right, and I think that's pretty much on par with what we would typically think of when we think of testing and getting prep for tests. Good stuff. Did anybody not have to take a test to get into their school? No. Okay. So test waivers, probably for most of you were not really available, I guess, at the schools that you're at the time you applied. So I wish. There you go. So
I might just add, Mike, I don't know if this is the case for all the schools, but Wharton and Lauder are truly ambivalent between the GRE and the GMAT. So I actually took the GRE and not the GMAT just because I came from this sort of non-traditional background. I majored in German in undergrad. Quant wasn't necessarily my strong suit. It was part of the reason why I wanted to go to business school. And so I opted for that and ended up taking it 3 times, studied, 4 to 6 months, like it sounds like a few people did. But just wanted to caveat that. I don't know if it's true for all the schools, but I think increasingly schools are agnostic between the two.
Yeah, no, that is a great question. Anybody else take the GRE versus the GMAT? Justin, Destinée took the GRE. Okay, so we're about almost split on that. Yeah, which makes sense. And you're all, again, at great schools. Anushka, what do you got?
Just wanted to say a quick thing. So I actually took the GMAT ones. So I mentioned I studied for about 4 months. I took the GMAT ones and I think I got a 690 on it. And I poured my heart and soul into studying for those 4 months. Like I really didn't cut corners. And when I did that, I think at the time, Stern's, like they have those average bars that you have to hit. I think Stern's might have been 720. And I knew in my heart of hearts, like I was not going to hit that 720 if I took it again. So then I found out about something called the EA, which is executive assessment, and some schools allow it. The way that I would describe it is it's the GMAT's little sister. And it wasn't something that I knew about. It was something that one of the Stern students actually told me about when I was talking to them kind of over coffee chats. And so that's kind of, I don't know. At the end of the day, I submitted both my GMAT and my EA score, which was a lot better. The EA is like an hour and a half or an hour and 45 minutes compared to like the 3.5 hour test. And so it's the same sort of questions. I would urge people to look into that if they think that they're hitting like a roadblock with the GMAT, because a lot of schools do accept it. So that's the plug I'll make.
Yeah, good tip. I'm glad you said little sibling, right, of the GMAT, because it's made by the same test takers. So that is exactly, they're both GMAT exams. And many schools are, yes, they're adding it in. For folks who are considering EA, right, definitely go on to the admissions requirements page for the school you're interested in and just kind of cross-check, right? Like make a list of all the schools you want to apply to, which tests are accepted to each of those schools. That may swing your decision sometimes, because if you take the EA and you can't go to 3 of the schools you want to go to, like that's just one thing you got to consider. But most programs are, yes, also now taking the EA as well as like the MCAT and the LSAT, and like don't go take those, please. Like if you're from those trades, yes, take those. Do not come out of like a marketing program and go take the LSAT. I don't recommend that for you. If you do it and get a great score, I want to meet you and we're going to have some coffee. Okay. So one last like admissions question for now, at least. What would you give as like a tip? Like what's like, so like your tip right there, right? Consider the EA, that's something different, right? What's another cool like application trick or tip that you figured out along the way that helped you a lot? And I see you all kind of like racking your brains. Does anybody want to kick this one off? And you might not have one, and that's fine. But yeah, Azu, go ahead.
Yeah, I can jump in. So during second year at Tuck, I was one of the Tuck admissions associate. So basically, we are the interviewer for the candidate. So I got to know the application side of things a little bit more from an interviewer perspective. I guess my tip is, I saw the question asking, oh, what's the proportion of GMAT that's going to determine the outcome? It's very hard to say. The good thing is it is really human driven, which means each application, people look at it as a human being. It's not like just a number or just this essay is good or not. It's like they're really trying to figure out who you are as a person. So being authentic is very important, but also it's your chance to plan why you want to pursue MBA. I know it sounds a little bit cliche, but application process itself is very helpful for you to achieve a really good 2 years, because if you know why you want it and how you plan to do it, it's a wonderful 2 years of your life, more than just finding a job and getting that MBA degree. It's a really good experience. I hope that answers some of the question.
No, it does. And yes, it did come up in the chat. And I would agree with that, like from talking to admissions folks from many different schools. It is hard to say like this is the rubric. There's not a rubric. Like they're looking at everything you submit. And sometimes if you have a really cool aspect of your application that brings that area up a bit for you, and another area is a little lower, like you could still get in, and vice versa if it's the opposite for somebody else. It's a balanced cohort. I think people hear cohort and they just think that's the year you start. But what cohort really is like you're looking for like a patchwork of people with different backgrounds and experiences and things they can bring to the table. And when you're in those classrooms and you do a case study or you bring up a topic, all those perspectives start to come out. And that's where the learning comes from, at least like in my experience. I don't know if anyone here agrees, disagrees with that, but I feel like MBA programs, you could learn just as much from the person sitting next to you in your class as you could from the faculty member who's like being paid to teach. Like, I feel like there was like I see a lot of nodding heads. It's because that person next to you could have a totally different life experience than you and look at that from a totally different perspective. And it's interesting. It's interesting because it makes you think different too. So yeah, good stuff. Any other tips before we move on from, I see Minnie and Justin at the same time. So
Minnie, go ahead.
Minnie, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think one thing that I did a lot was really to try to decode. Again, you can't do this 100%, but try to think through what the school is looking for. And that's almost like a manual keyword scraping machine that you kind of put yourself into and really look through the school website, talk to people just to see what kind of qualities are very important. So just to give you an example, I felt like at the time, and I think that this is true, MIT Sloan really values creativity. And at the same time, they want you to be quantitative enough so that you can keep up with the core curriculum and so on. So in the application, they did ask a lot about, what kind of quantitative courses or certificates you had from before. It doesn't have to be one specific thing, but if you don't come from a quant or any quantitative type of role, I would just recommend trying to balance that out in your profile. And also creativity, just show that I think a lot of schools do value this, but this is an engineering school at large. So just try to kind of see what from your experience would fit that kind of profile. I think that was really helpful. A bit of a shameless plug, but I do have a YouTube channel that went into this extensively. So I think there's definitely a lot that, you can look into and also kind of craft in your application. So happy to expand later.
There you go. We're going to compete for views now. This video from this session and your channel. No, I'm just kidding. That's awesome. Thank you for that helpful tip as well. Justin, how about for you?
I think Anushka kind of alluded to it earlier on, but like, I would say like get to really know the admissions team outside of like the front facing person you may meet at the event or your first interaction. I think for me, the goal was like when my application sets foot into their hands, they already knew who Justin was before they even received it. But it's also kind of like what Anushka was alluding to as well, was like it's sort of like a dating process where like you're also trying to figure out if that's the right school for you. And like what Minnie was sharing about how MIT is very quant based, or like they have a very quant background and engineering and such. If that's not really what you're looking to get out of an MBA program, then maybe that's not the best school for you. So you have to kind of go through that process and be, I don't know how to say it, more confident enough to realize that like, hey, maybe MIT or whatever school may not be the best for me, or maybe Ross is not the best school for me based on like the conversations that I've had. Which kind of goes to the second point too, which is like getting to know the students, because all of these things kind of help, at least me, impact my application and my essays, where everything that I was pointing to was based off of like the stuff that you couldn't really find on the website. You had to like really get to know the school to like really get that out. So for me, those were very important during the process.
Destiny, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just hop in really quickly. In addition to everything folks have shared, I think I would also add, this is super cheesy, but just be very self-aware and be very aware of the biases that you may have on paper. And so I'll use myself as example. I was a math major, I did banking. I knew that my biases coming in would be that she's very quant focused and maybe doesn't have the strongest EQ or like leadership or management skills. And so in my essays and in every interaction I had with admissions, whether it be informal or formal, I made sure to really hammer in the strength of my EQ and my leadership. So that could kind of begin to counterbalance the narrative around me. And so whether it's have a friend who is brutally honest or a manager and like sit down and talk to them, like where just on paper, what are my flaws, or where do you think I have areas for development that need to be addressed, and proactively address that in your essays and in your interactions and in whatever supplemental work you might do as you prepare.
Another great tip. These are great tips. I mean, I asked the question thinking like, I saw you all looking around like, oh, am I going to have one? This is great. So one of the things with like applying to school, right? You have to kind of like open your heart up and like throw it into an application, right? So you really got to like own yourself and own your story. And Destiny, kind of like what you just hinted at is like, it's hard for people sometimes. Like I'm not saying it was hard for you, but like it could be hard for anybody. Just trying to fill these essays out, fill in these short answers, feel comfortable in those conversations, whether it's at an event early on, something at the school, phone call with the admissions rep, like all those conversations count so much in the process. So did anyone have like a struggle originally when putting your application together to like know what to even do, right? So like Destin, you told us like you figured out maybe what the admissions team would look for, and you kind of really tried to show how well-rounded you can be, right? Was it difficult to get to that point for you, or you felt pretty good that you can make that switch?
Oh, it was very difficult. I'm generally not the most open person, and I'm not very like I'm very humble. She bragged, but like, no, but I don't really talk about my accomplishments often, and so it was very, very difficult for me to kind of put myself on display in that way. I have a friend who is very good at doing it for me and gave me some advice, and he was often my first reader. And he'd be like, why aren't you talking about this great thing you did here that I know of? So I found a friend who kind of puffed up my ego a little bit and helped me put that on paper. But I think it's also like, the way I phrase it is, you're not pursuing an MBA to do anything less than bet on yourself. So like, why would you not show it fully? And showing up fully means talking about yourself, the good, the bad, the ugly, but also the excellent and the great, and putting that all out there. And the school that's for you, that will be well received. And so for me, like Tuck and the other programs I got into, those weren't, sorry, really brief sidebar. I hired a consultant based on a lot of advice I got, and he was lovely, very nice person. However, all the schools I got into were the schools where I took none of his advice and I rewrote the essay 3-4 days before. And not to say he's not incredible, but those were the places where I was the most myself and vulnerable, and the grammar was probably completely messed up. And I talked about, you know, all the crazy things I'd been through. And so really just be yourself and spend a lot of time journaling and reflecting and thinking about not just on paper why you want it, but actually like what will an MBA do for you that nothing else can.
Yeah. So an opposite plug, right? So that's not a good, we don't want to plug that person too much. Yeah, okay. So
Keep
we won't
going.
share that person's information in the chat. That'll stay on the side. Alexander, I saw you come off next.
Yeah, just to
Destiny
pick up
Center.
on some of the threads where Destinée left off, I thought her answer was great. It was also really tough for me, kind of coming from the opposite end of the application spectrum, someone who didn't have a big quant background. I was like, well, why do I want an MBA? Why do I want to go to business school? And having that conversation with myself, and really candidly and honestly, was probably the most valuable thing that I got out of my MBA application process, besides the acceptances to programs, because I know people who've gone through this whole process of applying and they've decided getting an MBA isn't for me right now. But the introspection that led them there led them to make decisions around their career, around their personal lives that have intrinsic value. Whether an MBA, a particular program, or some other opportunity is the right next step for you, I think being honest and open with yourself through the course of this process is only going to pay dividends later on.
More great advice again. Justin.
Yeah, it's like +1 to both of them. I would say that I'm a 2-time applicant, and the second time around actually was through the Reardon programs, which is very similar to MLT. And kind of what Destinée was sharing was like, it took people in that program to really like propel me and to like hype me up a bit and to say, okay, hey, like you actually have done some incredible work over the time before business school. And I think the toughest part for me also was trying to say, even in the interviews, was to say I versus we, because every time I was thinking about a project or anything that I'd accomplished, I'm always thinking about like, well, like we all did it, but I guess I have to like own it in a sense, you know what I mean? And yeah, Destinée's story really resonated with me, because I was just thinking about that time, like, yeah, I was in a really dark place, and luckily there's people who like were there to kind of make sure that like I was focused and was really hyping myself up, so to speak.
That's great. Yeah, it definitely helps to have a few really key folks in your process that can be your cheerleader, be your hype person, be your shoulder to cry on. Like there's all the roles, right? There's all the things that happen in this process. That all makes a lot of sense. So, all right, we'll transition now out of choosing and applying and all that, right? So we all got in, yay. What happened next, right? So what did you do? Anushka, you moved across the country to move to the biggest city in the country. Like, what happened? What were you thinking? Like in a good way, right? Like you got in, like, was it panic? Was it excitement? Was it both? And then like, what'd you do next?
I feel like I have a little bit of a unique take. So this was definitely excitement, definitely nervousness. I'm an only child, so I'm really close to both my parents. And I think that's the hardest part of still being in New York, is just that they're so far away. I left, before business school, I was a software engineer, working kind of in the financial services space. So I ended up right before business school changing my industry and function, and then obviously location. So I started working for a pro soccer team as a marketing specialist here in the New Jersey, New York area. So it was a lot of change at once. I was doing that and then did that as I was entering school. But Stern was very supportive of just like everything, because I was doing that. And then as I started, I was getting a lot of advice from like the MBA twos who were the year above me. And so I think that truly it's the sense of community here that kept me afloat and just kept me going and motivated. So really, really grateful for that.
That's awesome. And if I take the 4 train north, we end up at Taylor School. And can you am I right? Did I get the right train?
It's the one.
I was gonna say
close.
the one.
It's a number.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, give us your side of that, right? So same thing in the same city, but what's your experience transitioning to go to school?
Yeah, certainly. So going back to school, I feel like was a bit of a whiplash, because you're doing stuff at work, you're in charge of projects, you're doing real world things, working with people, and then suddenly you go back to having pop quizzes and having to do icebreakers with a bunch of people. So I felt like that took about maybe a month to adjust before you go, okay, this is normal, rather than some sort of weird alternate world. Also, the other thing I wasn't expecting was how much I guess like time it would take, and not necessarily in a bad way, because you spend a lot of time socializing and networking with companies. But I feel like there's a stereotype that the MBA is a huge vacation, but the total number of hours between classes and your social calendar and recruiting, if you're doing more than one industry, adds up to quite a bit. And maybe, you know, after you get an offer, you get to relax a bit, but you got to make sure to be, I'd say, well rested before you start and not burned out.
Makes sense. And it's funny, yeah, the adjustments, right? The icebreakers. It is funny. You're a student again. It's fun. It's like, but it's different because now you have like money and stuff. Like it's not the same as when you were a student the first time, and you know, we all were like scratching 2 pennies together. It's like, you know, now you had a job for a bit, so you go out and like get a nice couch for your room and stuff. Like it's a little different. Okay, great. Anyone else for like the transition period? Any other like interesting stories or things you may have done to prepare to go back to class? Does anybody take any classes or do any like even exec ed courses or online courses to like prepare to sit in a classroom again? Did that happen for anyone? Not in this room. Okay. Oh, maybe. Yeah.
I'm a
Okay.
little bit of a nerd. I took UCLA's math for management because the math I studied in undergrad was basically writing essays with numbers. And just to kind of like reorient my head because I had quite some time between working in strict finance. So just wanted to get back into that. That was helpful to just reorient my brain. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, I took HBS's core program to Destinée's point about being self-aware. Again, kind of coming from a humanities background, I wanted to reassure that application readers that I could definitely handle any quant corporate curriculum that was thrown at me. And any way I could demonstrate that on the application that went above and beyond the classes that I took in college, I thought was a good idea.
Makes sense. All right. All right, good there. So now we're in school. All right, so let's talk a little bit about career side because I know it's a big thing people are looking for when choosing schools and applying to schools. Outcomes are huge, obviously. So we'll talk about two different portions of it, right? We have the internships, which some of you are probably in now, right? And then we have when you graduate. So let's just go around everybody and give us like a little bit about your career office. Do you like it? Were they great? Did they help you? Or did you find help from other areas of campus or other areas of your life? And obviously, you know, for your experience. So if you're in the internship stage, it's from that internship lens. If it's from, you know, getting a job now, maybe both, maybe you had a different experience as you went through both of those stages of the program. So does anyone want to kick us off here? Because we're just going to go around to everybody anyway. No, do I have to call on someone? Do I have to like pop call them? What is that called?
I can start.
Thank you.
So at Stern, we have our Office of Career Development. They're called OCD. I think they're workshopping that name. But
they're just really on it. That's the thing.
As a side note, I do think OCD was very helpful in terms of just kind of, you know, reading over resumes and doing maybe like some basic mock interviews, like behaviorals and things. But when it really came down to the value of prepping and recruiting, our MBA 2s really were the ones that deserve all the praise and all the medals. And I think at Stern, it's a very cyclical thing where, you know, when our MBA 2s were MBA 1s, their MBA 2s helped them in the sense, essentially like handheld them through the recruiting process, whether that's consulting or tech or investment banking. And I think that kind of translates for us. And now next year, I think we feel very compelled to give back to next year's class. And I think that cyclical process just is really what keeps the school going more than even just like the Office of Career Development. So that's my take on it.
That's great. The whole pay it forward, right? It's kind of that, yeah, that's awesome to hear. And also another testament to the environment that you found yourself in at NYU where, you know, it's a nice culture there. If the students are helping each other out, that's great. Who wants to go next?
I just wanted to say our career office is called CDO, but I definitely think they should probably change their name. I do like that one. I think for Sloan, I would say, I think because I was recruiting for tech, and as you could probably guess, this is probably the second worst, if not the worst year to recruit for tech after, you know, 2008, or, you know, just looking for jobs in general. I think this is the time where I think most of us just didn't focus on using one resource for any types of recruiting. I think the career office, I think as Anushka mentioned, will be really helpful in terms of helping you with the resume and the initial screening, and also having a database for you to reach out to companies and recruiters, but really preparing for the interviews and understanding the scope of the role. Your alumni or second year network would be the best, I think, in terms of giving you the real lens into what the job or the role would be like. And I think at Sloan, at least in my experience, any company that I really wanted to target, I was able to find someone who either works there or is working there at the moment to speak to, in the product management space at least. And I think it's the same for many other types of roles, whether it's VC or banking or consulting. So I think I found that environment to definitely be very, very helpful.
That's great. Paying it forward again. This is a common thread. We're already seeing a thread starting, guys. Alexander, I saw you come off mute.
Oh, yeah. So I would definitely echo Minnie's point about the alumni network. I think that they're a phenomenal resource to understand what the day-to-day of the career will actually be like, and also to have perspective on, okay, I know I want to do this maybe, or try this out for an internship or my first role post-grad, but what does this career look like 10 years down the line, 20 years down the line? Is it something I want to stay in, or am I using this as another stepping stone, just like my MBA, to another place in my career or my life? I thought Wharton's MBA Career Management Office, MBA CM, they call it, is phenomenal. I think they're most helpful in helping people execute on career pivots, helping people understand industry landscapes, firm profiles. They can connect you oftentimes with alumni that work in those fields or at those companies you want, so you can use them to navigate towards other resources as well. I myself was a career pivoter. I was coming from boutique consulting, and I'm entering, I mentioned it in the chat, brand management at Kenvue, so marketing. I use them to understand what are the top skills that are used in this field. What would an internship there look like? What is the day-to-day like? What's the work-life balance at this firm versus that firm? I mean, you can Google these things, but it's really hard to gain a real lived sense of what the day-to-day is actually like without speaking to people and really doing your research. Coffee chats with students who interned there. So your peers are also another resource. So there are so many outlets. And then again, I would say diversity conferences can be helpful, when you're recruiting as well. Like I used Rumba again. I went as a pre-MBA to figure out what school I wanted to go to. Then I went as an MBA student. I actually got my internship and my full-time offer through them. And then I'm going to be going back and recruiting there on behalf of my firm post-grad. So, I mean, these things follow you. And I think that's true of the networks you develop over the course of your MBA in general. Is like the people you speak to aren't going to go anywhere. They're part of your life, for future. Should you decide, this internship wasn't for me, let me go back and speak to that person that I spoke to 6 months ago. Or, the industry I wanted to recruit for, as Minnie said, is experiencing some really hard times. And so let me reevaluate and try something new. I mean, I think you've got all these tools in your toolbox, and the career services office of these schools is just one of them.
That's great. And a nice shout out for the conferences, which is great. I've heard many great things about a lot of the ones you've all have mentioned today. Justin, how about for you?
Yeah, I think same sentiments as pretty much everyone else. I was part of the consortium, so a lot of our preparation was like done, I think the day I deposited my money. Like that next week, I think they were on me about everything with resumes and essay or interviews, etc. I didn't mention this earlier, but like I came from the startup space. And so for me, one big reason for business school was my network I felt was tapped out. And I had chosen Ross because I thought they had an extensive network outside of just like the people who were 2-3 years ahead of you, but then it was like 10 years ahead of you. And a lot of the folks there had mentioned this, and I took full advantage of it and saw if it was actually true. And it boded pretty well for me. I went to school during the pandemic. So instead of like, I basically did internships the whole time. I did like 2 or 3 like internships in between the semesters, just because I could just do that while going from Zoom to Zoom. And all the people that I had worked for were from the Ross network. So it really boded well for me. But at the same time, like to what like Alexander was mentioning, a lot of those conversations as well was just like candid conversations about, hey, is this the right industry that I should be going in, etc. The one thing I'll say is that like, and this could just be a Ross thing or whatever it is that like, I feel like the career services really are geared towards like 3 or 4 industries, like the banking, tech, consulting, marketing, etc. But then outside of that, it sometimes gets a little bit murky. And so like, I was interested in venture capital. And so luckily I had a network of folks who were in the industry that could help out, but like, that's not one of the biggest, like, career aspirations for a lot of MBA folks. And so you kind of have to get your hands dirty, but that kind of goes back to like using your network, putting in the LinkedIn message. I'm a Ross, 22. Will you take 15 minutes for a call? So don't lose that hungriness that you had to get into business school. You're going to have to use it again to get into the company of your choice.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, Destinée.
I have a +1 at Justin. So I was also in consortium and did MLT, not career prep. They have a second program for after you get in. It's very similar. And so a lot of my recruiting was done kind of right around the time I was moving and starting orientation at Tuck. So how I use career services might be a little bit different. So I think career services in my first year and in my second year, I use more as a reflection, kind of like hold a mirror up to me, like, am I making the right choice? Because early recruiting, like while it's great, it also has a lot of challenges associated with it. And so I was able to go to them and be like, okay, I know I wrote these things, but what do I actually want to do when I grow up? Like, am I still the same person I was a year ago? The answer was no, totally normal. That's okay. But then they helped me work through it. And like, there's a course on like designing your life where you work through that with a career services director, or hey, like, how do I send this email turning down this internship in a way that says maybe I might want to come back next year because it's so early, or I may want to stay in touch while I negotiate other things. And so they've been a really great resource for me. So in my first year, that was the case. In my second year, again, like, hey, I think I like my internship, helped me reflect on what was good, what was bad, maybe what didn't, met expectations and didn't. And so that was my personal experience. But I will say at Tuck generally, and you can jump in at any time if I'm misspeaking, but they're kind of 3 resources. You have the career services, which is awesome, excellent, super hands-on. Like we have a group me where they like text us, especially with the current environment, people who are still looking, they're like very, very intentional. So there's career services. Then there are second years, which Anushka and Minnie and Justin and Alexander have touched on, and Taylor, so everyone. And then the third prong is faculty and our like career centers. And so we have special, like at Tuck, and I imagine other programs as well, but we have career centers. So there's a center for private equity and venture capital. There's a center for entrepreneurship, and there's staff directors who, in addition to providing programming, also are sending you jobs as soon as you indicate you're even remotely interested. So I'm affiliated with the Center for Business, Government, and Society. I get emails from the director all the time, like, hey, what are you doing this summer? Interested in an internship with this like congressperson? And then faculty as well are a really great resource that's often overlooked. But some of my greatest professional leads, and they haven't led to internships, but have been from just talking to a professor and saying, hey, I think I may want to do this someday and I don't have any experience, and then plugging me into an internship interim or supplementary work to do that.
Awesome. I would jump in because I'm also a Tuckie. Only thing I can say is Tuck Career Service has been amazing because I already had expectation before I even enrolled. I was a candidate in the diversity conference before I applied. And during that diversity conference, there was an alum. She's T09 or T08. So when the financial crisis just happened, and she shared a story, everyone was like losing their offer got, withdrawal, like that kind of situation. But the career service alumni professor, Tuck is very tight-knit, family-like, just reach out to friends, family, everyone to help everyone finding internship and full-time job. That year, the employment rate at Tuck is 100%. So everyone got a job, even though it's a very huge financial crisis. So I had that story in mind already. So I enrolled, and I cannot believe so, because a lot of the career advisors, they are Tuckies, and we're literally in the middle of nowhere, which I love. So you see them every single day, and they can be even your landlord for some of my classmates. It's not only just career advice, but you can just talk about anything. So I still remember I was, a recruiter reach out. She wants to end interview in an hour. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense. So I just ad hocly just asked Stephen, the executive director of career service, for help in that moment. And he was like, okay, let's jump into market interview right now. So that's just some example. And I heard so many really good story is like, a media student reached out to a CEO in a really good company, and the CEO didn't reply for 3 days. The first thing the CEO said is sorry. So that says something about Tuck alumni. It's a very nice group of people, and no matter whether you are Tucky or you are just a media student, they will definitely be responding. So I just want to mention that.
Fantastic. And then Taylor, did we have you on this question? I don't believe so, right?
No, but just to echo what everyone said, you know, it's kind of a you lean on the alumni network a lot, you lean on the career office, and lean on your club for what you're recruiting for, and you know, make the most of your resources, and it works out pretty well for everyone. The one thing that I think maybe didn't come up, and maybe I missed it, but usually Slack channels will have some really interesting opportunities. For instance, recent alumni with a startup, or you know, a small company where they're looking to hire just a one-off associate. They don't even take an intern every year. That stuff comes up, and I feel like that's where the alumni network can really shine for something that is perhaps a bit different than, you know, the typical consulting or banking or other on-campus recruiting.
Yeah, it's and those Slack channels, I mean, you all get into that basically when you get admitted, right? So you can start networking as soon as you're admitted to a school, which is great, and that continues as you graduate. So really awesome stuff there. So we'll call that the career section, right? Because we went through, there's a lot of really great advice there on what to look out for, what the school's career services should offer, what they do offer, what they might offer, and then all the other resources that you'll get as a business school student. So I think we've covered that section of the agenda. We've got like 5 or 6 minutes left. And what I think would be good as a nice kind of wrap up would be, you know, if you think about who's in this room with us tonight or today, if you're joining us from not on the East Coast like we are all in, you know, if you're in their shoes a year ago, 2 years ago, you know, back when you were applying, what is that piece of advice you want to give that person now that you have the experience? Either you just finished your first year, you finished the program totally. You know, what's something you wish you knew then that you can now tell those folks today, right? This is something you need to know before you go to business school. And if you don't know it, then now you do. So, who wants to start there? Justin, you're the first one up, so kick us off. That also means now everyone else has to think of a second tip. So this is a good one to go first. See, Justin's got it going on. He knows.
That's too much pressure on me. I will just say this, that find the right school for you. I know it sounds like very simple, but like when I first applied to business schools, I was one of those people who was like looking at just rankings. You apply to the schools, etc. And then for me, at least when I visited Ross, it was that moment that I was like, oh, wow, like this is the school for me. And it took some vulnerability. It takes some being honest with myself, some reflection, etc. But you have to truly do your research and like visit the schools, see this, like meet the students, etc. And be confident enough that like no matter what school you go to, you have to bet on yourself and it's all going to work itself out, and not get caught up in the hoopla of the rankings and etc. and how it'll look on your resume. But just find the best fit for you and where you'll be the most successful.
Great stuff. All right, who wants to take number 2? Because again, now that one's out, so we have to think of new ones now. Alexander, go ahead.
That one, yes. I think my one piece of advice would be, you know, as much as applying to an MBA feels like a professional decision, it's also a decision about the kind of life that you want to live and the kind of world that you want to build. And I just wish that more people going into the MBA, throughout the MBA, you know, in their first jobs post MBA, thought more about like, how is this one step on a greater path towards a life that I'm trying to build for myself, rather than like the be all end all, or the singular goal, right? Because that I think is the wrong way of approaching the MBA. It should be a step towards something, and not just towards a professional path, but towards a life that you want to live and something you want to dedicate yourself to, rather than, you know, just getting in and having the story end there, because that's not what anybody wants, right?
I love that. Hey, look at this. You got someone in the chat. Excellent way to put it. And it is. That is a great, I don't think I've heard someone describe it in that manner before. And it's perfect. Like that does make a lot of sense. It's a step in the journey, right? It's not the finish line or the way to get to that finish. Like, you know what I mean? It's not like this is your last step before you finish. It's like, no, it's just another lap in the race. Like, we're still going here. We got a lot more to do. So thank you for that one. That's another good one. Taylor.
Yeah, so my one tip would be, to have the courage to stick to your convictions, because you only get, one shot at doing the MBA. If you really want to do something, and it's a bit, quirky or less typical, like you have to really persevere and go for that. And it's tough when you're passing up some of the less risky routes where you go for one of the main tracks that everyone's doing, and you go for something that's perhaps just in time. So I think that would be my one tip.
Love it. Stick to your guns and go with what you want to go with. I like that.
Yeah, I will promote something more philosophical. I will promote mindfulness. That's something I really practice during the time I talk. It's like everyone think, oh, if I get that admission, life will be happy forever. But human brain has the mechanism of always chasing, and there's never an end. So my recommendation and tip is just really focus on this moment and just really enjoy this process. I know it's very nervous and everything like that, but when that time is gone, it never comes back. Even for me right now, I'm in consulting and people always, maybe once they become partner, life will be good. No, actually, I really enjoy being an associate. I enjoy the current role. I enjoy the current learning curve. I don't want to, at the end of my life, feel like I missed my life. I want to experience it. So philosophical tip, just be mindful and just truly be in the current moment and just enjoy this process. There will never be, the ultimate goal that you get there and you will be happy forever. That's just not the case.
I will say, so that one reminds me of the episode of the sitcom The Office where the characters Jim and Pam get married and they say to each other, we have to remember these moments, and they take these quick little fake camera of like little moments that happen in the episode. And the point of that is just to take that moment to breathe, experience. They're at their wedding episode. So it's like, you're only going to get married this one time to each other, and hopefully maybe that's it. I see some Office fans in the chat. So, I think what you're saying there, right, is like experience those moments, live in those moments. Don't just like, okay, I'm getting an MBA. It's another race to the finish line. Like, no, it's not. Like every day you're going to do something different and you're back at school. I think Taylor mentioned that before. Like, go experience the campus again. Like, go sit in the dining hall. Like, go like be a student for 2 years. Like, it's amazing. And that might be your last chance. I mean, there's not a lot of other degrees you're going to get beyond an MBA. So I love that one as well. Destinée, you stole yours. So I don't know if you want to wait a little bit to think of a second one.
I have a different flavor. Like, as you can tell, we both went to tech because but mine was also about reflection, but maybe a little bit different. I think keep a journal. This is you think at this side of, on one end of the process, you think the hardest part is applying, and then you get in to multiple schools, and at least for me, the hardest part was deciding where I wanted to go. And it was really helpful to go back to my journals and reread the first interaction I had with an alum or school. A really tangible thing you can do is I created an Excel. And I would write obviously what me and that individual had spoken about, but I also had a column for how did I feel about myself? Was I being authentic in the interaction, or did I feel like I was putting on airs? And it was just 1 or 2 sentences. And definitely by the end of my process, I'd probably spoken to about, 100 people. And I was able to filter by school and see kind of some of the nuances, going back from the diversity conferences to things like this, to people I really resonated with, all the way to hey, I got accepted in the phone call. And was I acting a little bit? Was I being 100% genuine? And for me, that very clearly steered me towards Tuck. Honestly, that was the deciding factor between Tuck and another school, because I was yeah, I talked about Harry Potter for an hour with someone I just met. I can't do that anywhere else. They're going to think I'm weird. And I am, but that's great. And it was weird enough for Tuck. So highly recommend it.
I love it. Nothing weird about that. My son just got into Harry Potter, so I'm rewatching all the movies again. And I didn't realize how old the first movie is. And I'm now I'm dating myself. But no, that's great. That's awesome. Be authentic, be yourself. And the journaling thing is that's a nice one too. So awesome stuff. Minnie, Anushka, who's got it the next? Yep, Anushka, you're up next. Minnie, you got to
it's just really tough to add on. I would say at this point, just also trust your gut. I think that's something that, at the end of the day, I applied to one school and it was really nerve-wracking to be am I sure? Because if I miss this, then I don't really have a backup plan. But don't just, apply to 5 or 10 schools because that's what you hear, your peers doing. Like if you're passionate about 2 or 3 schools or whatever that is for you, pour your heart and soul into it, because I think your application will probably be stronger at the end of the day. So again, maybe ties into a little bit of authenticity, but that's probably the advice I would give.
Makes sense. And you lived it. I mean, 1 for 1, right? I mean, that's like, let's go. That's awesome. Minnie, how about for you? I know you had a lot before you, so if you have to lean on some, I'll allow it, since you're going last for us. You're doing a big favor.
Appreciate that. This definitely has been mentioned many times already during this conversation, but I would say just be, again, very clear about your intention of going to MBA, but also stay very open-minded about it. The reason why I say this, I think I totally echo what Destinée mentioned about the decision that you have to make between schools if you end up applying to multiple schools and get admitted. I had this whole spreadsheet about like finances and my post-MBA salary and all that criteria, but I think at the end of the day, not to say they're not important, but it was really that last gut feeling that pushed me to just go for what I wanted and take the risk. I think as Taylor mentioned. So I just go back to your intention, ask yourself, why am I doing this a million times? But once you enter the program, I think to me, my biggest surprise was that my growth was really prominent to me in the self-discovery space. So I had the career, had explored different, types of career paths and, knowledge and whatnot, but really it was going back to my core values and, learning about kind of who I am as a person. I think that part I really didn't expect to go through during my MBA program. So just be open-minded about what you might get out of it as well.
I love it. This is all great. We're at the end of our hour. Destiny, you have one more thing? Go ahead.
Minnie just reminded me of something, and it may be a little bit crass, but like honesty is the best policy. Prepare yourself financially. If you want to fully be in this program and do the things and go on the trips, like it's expensive, and it's more expensive than a lot of schools will list on their website. And so the little things you can do around paying off credit card debt and kind of just maybe paring down your lifestyle, the earlier you do it, the richer your experience will likely be. So yeah, I just wanted to drop that.
Awesome. No, that's also good advice. Yeah, definitely make sure that you are fully prepared of what those costs will be. And also know that that's another area of like self-reflection. You don't have to do everything also, but there is some FOMO that will happen. So just going to say that. Although I keep seeing like Yacht Week and I never got invited. So like it is what it is. But anyways, I watched the Below Deck show, but I don't think that's the same thing, right? I don't think, yeah, it's not. Okay. You actually be on the boat. Yeah, okay. So anyways, I do want to thank our panelists. I want to thank our attendees. I want to thank everyone who hung out with us for the past hour to learn a lot about everything MBA. Lots of really great perspectives, really good tips. I think the common themes that I took away today are being authentic to yourself and your journey, and the fact that it is a journey and it's not a race to get to the end of your program and beyond. It's kind of like enjoying those moments and taking advantage of the fact that you're going through a program and going back to school and enjoying that time, and really taking a lot of advantage of the interactions that you'll have, whether that's with the school directly or the career office directly or all the folks that are involved, including tonight, right? So I do see, there's some folks within our panel sharing contact information, or the fact that our attendees came to this event and listened to you all tonight. Like, this is all part of this process for you all. It's like now you're getting this advice, really candid discussion, and it's really appreciative. One last thing I'll mention that I hear from a lot of admissions reps when it comes to like what's a tip in the application process: they read to admit, not look to deny. So when it comes to like self-selection out and I might not be a fit here and I don't know about my scores, they will look for the items that will get you into their school. So have those interactions, put your best foot forward, apply to the school you want to go to based on the spreadsheets or the journals or all the things we talked about. And best of luck to everyone who's here tonight applying to business school. It's a great experience, and we hope you all get into the school you want to and enjoy your time there. So one more time, thank you all for joining us, and we will post this video probably sometime tomorrow and email out to everybody here. So thanks again. Thanks, panelists. Appreciate